Hello and welcome back to the Don't Panic, We're All Going to Die podcast. My name is Johnny Nava, and today I have Ben Hecht joining me. Ben is one of the founders of one of my favorite bands, Karate Baseball, where he plays just about every instrument. He's also a cinematographer for his day job, so he's just one of those super creative people that you meet every once in a while. In the last episode, I promised that this episode would be an experimental one, and I'll explain what I meant. When I bring a guest onto this podcast, it's because I'm a fan of their work and because I think that they have something important to say. As of right now, this podcast doesn't have any ads, and I'd like to keep it that way as long as I can. At the same time, there are bands like Karate Baseball that I think are brilliant, and I'd like more people to know about them. So instead of advertisements, I'm going to be featuring a few of their songs throughout this episode. I won't play the whole song, but hopefully by the end of the episode, you'll understand why I like them so much. So here you go. Welcome, Ben, to the Don't Panic, We're All Gonna Die podcast. Today with me, I have Ben Hecht. He is a cinematographer, photographer, and also a founding member of the band Karate Baseball, who you just heard in the theme song. I don't necessarily know what to call you, Ben, because I feel like I've gone to several of your shows, and you're playing so many instruments on stage. So what would you say your role is in the band?
The biggest role, I guess, is cheerleader, but I also play bass and guitar and keys and background vocals badly, but it's good fun.
It's definitely good fun. As someone who's been to quite a few shows, that I like to tell people they're your new favorite band whenever I introduce them to you guys to people. But before we get into the music side of things, I would love to just learn a little bit more about who you are. I mentioned that you're a photographer, a cinematographer. I think that's really cool because I know a lot of like wedding photographers or event photographers that are interested in pivoting into, doing more cinematography work. So maybe could you just tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and then how you kind of started a career doing cinematography for movies?
Yeah, sure. So I started doing like camera stuff, photo stuff in high school. I had a friend that was really into photography, and I was like, oh, cool, like that looks fun. He brought his camera to school one day, and I remember thinking like, wow, that's cool. Like I saw the focus and when you could like change to like the shallow depth of field and everything, like in the background's out of focus. And it was like before iPhones and stuff had like really good cameras, so I was like, wow, this is amazing. I've never done anything like this. And so I saved up a bunch of money and bought my first camera and started doing it just for fun and got really into it. And like living in LA, being from LA, there's just a ton of, that sort of art around where people are doing photos, and there's a lot of like film stuff going on here. And so I kept going at it, and then I went to college, and I was at Cal State Northridge, and I was in the business program, and I remember just thinking like, man, like I don't know if being at a corporate job 9 to 5 is like really what my life is meant to be at this point. Like, what other options do I have? because they had a really good business program there. And then I was looking at other like notable CSUN programs, and there's a lot of them, but one of them is the film program. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like, there's people that, you know, get to hang out with cameras like for their job and get paid for it and like do stuff with cameras. And so I started doing a little more research about that, and then I was like, all right, that seems like what I want to do. And I kind of went for it, and so far it's been pretty good. I finished my degree at CSUN with like my emphasis in cinematography, and after that I started, you know, easing my way into the industry. Again, being from LA, it was kind of nice because a lot of people I know are in the industry, and I was able to like meet a lot of mutual connection people, which I feel like is totally what the industry is all about. Is like who you know, and I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase like it's who you know, not what you know. And so yeah, I've been doing it for 6 or 7 years now, like camera stuff specifically. It took me a little while to go from like being a PA to like a cinematographer. And now even like the work I do is like a lot in that world. Like sometimes it's DP, which is the director of photography, which is like, you know, the one that's totally in charge of the visual aspect of whatever you're watching, of all the content. And so you get to choose the lighting and the camera angles and which camera you're going to use and the lenses and, you know, all the technical stuff. And I love that because it's like total control, you know. But then there's other roles like, you know, the gaffer who sort of is the lighting guy, like paints with lights, and you know, there's a lot of roles, but I'm happiest when I get to hold a camera in my hand and capture what's going on.
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned there being a lot of roles on set. So my background, I did film as well before I switched to doing, you know, the sales job that I do now. And I was like so surprised. That was like the first thing I was surprised by when I first got into a set, where it was like, you know, going into film, I thought that there was, you know, maybe a couple people on the camera, and then you have a couple people on lights, and then, you know, the rest of the people are scattered around doing whatever job they're doing. But then when you get on an actual like legit set, you realize that there's like an entire team just for the camera, and then there's gaffers that are just for the lights, and there's like just like every subsection of what you see on screen has like an entire team devoted to it, even if it's just like, you know, the candles that are on the table at a dinner scene.
Totally, and I think that's what makes film such a cool medium also, is like it's such a collaborative thing. Like there's so many different people bringing so many different ideas and perspectives, all for one vision.
Definitely, it's like the culmination of every art in a lot of ways, because you're involving all the senses, and it takes, you know, usually it takes an entire team to produce one. That's what I kind of always get frustrated when I see, you ever see like directors when they put like a film by so and so in like the opening credits? That always kind of rubbed me like a little bit of the wrong way, just because it is so collaborative.
Totally, but yeah, I mean sometimes there's those directors that are like the ones that they see it and they like, you know, Kubrick was known for that too, where he would like direct it, but he would like tell the cinematographer like, okay, put this lens on your camera, because like he knew exactly what he wanted it to look like. But yeah, I think it's nice when it's a big collaborative process.
Right, the auteurs. So you mentioned starting off as a PA. So for those who don't know, it's production assistant. Generally, I think it's fair to say PAs tend to be the lowest on the totem pole when it comes to set. Would you agree?
I'd agree, yeah.
So curious, you know, how does that work for you? You know, coming in to being, you know, a PA and then working your way up to working the cameras and being a cinematographer, because I've had something similar where in my job I had to start at the bottom, and for me in sales it was just doing cold calls like every day for 2 years. Thankfully that's not necessarily what a PA does, but it's a similar grind where you kind of have to have the entry level role and then graduate to what you really want to do. How did that process look like for you?
Yeah, for me, it was a little maybe unusual. I got my start as an intern my junior year of college, and I was working at this company, a like new media company called Awesomeness TV that was operating mostly on YouTube at the time, and they're starting to grow. They were a startup when I started, but they're definitely getting bigger. And I was interning for a while, and then my internship ended, and I was like towards the end of my college years, and I was like, all right, well, you know, I'm only taking a few classes right now, so it'd be good to like still work as much as possible. And so I had some free days, and I was like, okay, well, I'm free like, you know, Tuesday and Thursday, so can I just like work as a PA for these days? And so anytime they were doing production on those days, I was able to secure PA jobs and like weekend shoots. Basically anytime I could work, I was working. And then I finally graduated college, and I was still doing most of my work there. And I had become close with a few of the producers that I was working with there. And I said, okay, like, I've been doing this for a while, but now I have a degree. I graduated. I know a little bit more than I did when I started. I want to do camera stuff now. And I think that was kind of a bold thing to say at the time, looking back at it. But it worked. Like, the producers at the time said, okay, cool, like, let's have you try out camera stuff. And then so I slowly started, like, hybriding between, like, PA sometimes, and when there was an opportunity, I could work camera. And I feel like that's really where I started learning so much more, because it was, like, so much more hands-on, where I could, like, oh, like, this is why people are doing this, and this is the way to do things. And so I started doing more camera, and then once I started sort of established myself as a camera operator at that time, I was able to go to other companies and other jobs and other productions and say, hey, like, I'm a camera operator too. And then I started getting more jobs that way, and then sort of just continued to climb the pole in that same way, like, camera operator for a while, keep going, and then eventually I was like, all right, I think I'm ready to, be the director of photography, and sort of said the same thing, like, hey, I could shoot the show, I could be the director of photography, and then got an opportunity, and yeah, the rest is history.
It's Johnny here, taking a quick break to talk about one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the undisputed greatest liquid of all time. It's not Gatorade. It's not Coca-Cola. Get this, it's not even tequila. It's water. Water's great for you. Keeps you hydrated, and it's great for you. Anyways, this next song is called Vroom.
It all happens fast, like a flood, it comes and goes, and then it's over. And we never had a chance in hell, but anyway, we kept at it. And I've been looking around, these walls are closing in. When did we begin? And I've been thinking about when's it gonna end? And then my head it says like and then my head it says like we're fighting now, batting down the hatches, it's a lightning round.
That's awesome, man. It's definitely encouraging to see, peers do well in the film industry. So I'm glad that you're doing well yourself, and really excited to see some of the projects that are coming out on the horizon. Are you familiar with the screenwriter Ben Hecht?
Yeah, of course. That was like, especially being in film school, like, I would get a text every day from friends being like, check this out, and it was a picture of their, textbook that said, famous screenwriter Ben Hecht, he was the first one to win an Academy Award for screenwriting, and he has quite a few famous stories. So yeah, definitely got my fair share of that.
Yeah, he's a legend in his own right. For those who don't know, Ben Hecht was one of the first big Hollywood screenwriters. So when movies switched over from being silent films to talkies, Hollywood had this big problem because they didn't have anybody that could write convincing dialogue. And so Ben Hecht was a master at writing dialogue because it seemed so natural. And so he just got hired to write over 100 movies, and he made a fortune. And he didn't even really like writing movies very much. He would spend 8 weeks tops and then just ship it off. But I always thought he was a really cool character because he just had a natural talent, cashed in on it, but then used that cash to front his other interests. And I don't know. I was wondering if there's any relation.
Actually, yeah, there is relation. It's kind of an obscure thing, but he was my father's... Okay, let's see. My dad's aunt's... So my father's great uncle.
Okay, so wow. I totally asked that question not thinking that there would be a relation, but that's awesome.
Yeah, there is. And so, I have some Bigfoot steps to fill, but no, it's different style. But he definitely was a pioneer of the writing, and so I feel that's really inspiring for me of even if it wasn't a relation, just somebody that did that, and you're saying, he kind of went from writing books, and he was a journalist. He wrote for the newspaper in Chicago, and then you said, sort of got picked up into the film industry, and started writing more and more in that. And he was like one of those like finisher guys where they would like be struggling with a script, and then they'd bring him in and he'd fix it up and then send it out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. And he did, I believe he did Gone with the Wind, which is like one of the all-time best movies. But also a real cool thing about him is I know that he was also like very much into like activism in like the 1920s. Like he was like very anti Ku Klux Klan. He was very anti-Nazi, which wasn't like a huge American sentiment like going into World War II. I always think it's cool when artists have some type of like moral compass that's maybe kind of goes against, maybe not necessarily goes against the grain, but is just a little bit unconventional. It seems to be coming from a sincere place. So that's cool that you're related to him. He's definitely a Hollywood legend. So I'm just curious, what is the process of starting a band look like? I think people underestimate how difficult it is to actually have that musical chemistry. So I was curious if you could just kind of walk us through that process and what it looked like for you.
My story is pretty interesting, actually. Like I started playing music with a friend that moved down from Washington, and we were like, oh yeah, let's start a band. We had the high aspirations of like, let's start a band and change the world, because that sounds cool. And I was like, all right, let's do that. Like, we'll write songs that change the world, and not even like, in a super like activist way, but just in a way of like, sometimes you listen to a song that like really hits you in the right spot, where it's just like, man, I'm feeling really sad today, and this song just expressed exactly how I feel, and like, that's cool. It's cool to like know that somebody else connected and felt the same way you're feeling, and so just taking that idea, and I was like, all right, like I want to connect with somebody. I want somebody to listen to my music and be like, wow, this makes me feel some type of way. And so that was sort of my goal for like why I wanted to pursue music. Mm-hmm. And so my friend moved down to from Washington, and we started trying to write music. And he wasn't much of a musician, but he had a lot of like background with writing, and so he was trying to do more of the lyrics, and I was trying to do more of the music stuff. But we were both pretty green and pretty novice at it. And one day, some of my other friends from Washington had just moved down, and I hung out with them, and they were saying they're kind of doing the same thing. They're like, yeah, we've been playing an open mic, I think it was Tuesday nights. Every Tuesday we've been playing the last couple of weeks. Like, you guys should come sometime. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And in my head I was thinking, okay, yeah, like open mic sounds fun because it's a cool way to like, get some experience playing, and like, play some of our material we've been writing. But to that point we'd still been struggling with like actually writing songs. And so I was like, okay, that sounds cool, but like, what kind of stuff are you playing? Maybe I can just come play music like with you guys if you guys are just like writing real songs. Like, that sounds cool. And then they're like, yeah, we've been doing this and this, like here's some of our music. And I listened to it and I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. It kind of reminds me of Starfucker, who was a band I really liked at the time. And they're like, oh yeah, like Starfucker is one of our big influences. And I was like, oh nice, like that's pretty cool that we all like that. And then so they keep playing their open mics, and we jam every once in a while together. And my initial friend from Washington moves back to Washington, and I was like, man, I feel kind of lost. Like, I wanted to play music with somebody. And so I reached out to these initial guys, Zach and Galen, and I said, hey, like, are you guys still playing music? I'd really like to play more music with you guys. And they're like, yeah, definitely. And they had a few songs, and I had my instruments, and we met up, and I learned some parts for their songs, and we were like, okay, let's go try one of these open mics. And then I remember going to the open mic, and it was like my first time ever playing music in front of people live, and I was so nervous. And it was like, 2 songs, 8 minutes, like nothing crazy. And it was like their songs. I just had like little parts on them, and I was like, all right, well, let's try it. And went through, and I just had such a blast. It was like such a thrilling, exhilarating moment, and I was like, wow, that was cool. Like, I would really like to do more of that. So we met up more frequently after that and started writing more songs that I could contribute to. I remember one of the first ones was, I was feeling really sad. I was like just going through kind of a lot. I just got out of a relationship, and just kind of a lot of stuff was going on. And I remember I had been fooling around with the piano, and I had these chords that were just like kind of really melancholy, sad chords. And I was like, man, these really express how I'm feeling. And that's all I had, was just like 3 chords and then like a little bridge section and then back to these 3 chords. And I remember I showed up to Zach and Galen's house, and I was like, hey guys, like I kind of felt like Eeyore. I was like all sad, like, all right guys, like I got these chords that I wrote, and I like played them, And then Zach's like, oh, those are pretty cool chords, but like, what if we sped it up, like 30 BPM? And I was like, I guess. And so Zach puts on sort of this like 4 to the floor, like dancey drum beat, and I start playing these chords, and it turned into a totally different song. It actually turned into what's now currently our most popular song, a song called Close, which is like a dancey song about, like a romantic relationship maybe. And it's just so funny because it came from like the saddest part of my heart and turned into like this fun dance song. But it was at that moment where I realized like, wow, like a band is so much more than just playing music and performing together, but it's about the collaborative creative process and like what you can do by all bringing different things together. And so I knew then, I was like, okay, this is a cool thing that I want to continue to be a part of.
All right, well, this feels like an appropriate time to play it, so here's Close.
You close, not close enough. I want you when I'm needing your affection, baby. I wanna know what you're thinking of. It's hard to tell standing at a distance. I don't wanna see you go away. Ooh, hey, ooh, what are you waiting for? I want you close, not close enough. Not close enough, not close enough, not close enough. And I know just how you're feeling. Over and over and over and over again. And it's not fair, no, it's not easy. And I know just what you're meaning. I wanna try, but I'm always not quite there. And it's not fair, no, it's not easy. I want you close, you're not close enough. I want you when I'm needing your affection, baby. I wanna know what you're thinking of. It's hard to tell when standing at a distance.
That's cool. I always love hearing about how artists came together because it always feels like no two stories is alike. But I'm curious, where did the name Karate Baseball come from?
Yeah, so initially when we started the band, we were going to the open mics, and they kept asking us, like, okay, well, what's your band? Like, you got to sign up. And they had, like, some name, I can't even remember what it was, before I joined. And then I was like, okay, well, now that I'm part of it, like, now we're a new unit, like, we need a new name. And so I remember we went, they lived in Hollywood, and one day we, like, met up before one of the open mics a few hours early, and we're like, okay, let's just go to this bar by their house and drink beers until we come up with a name. And we went and we sat there for like 2 hours because every single name we could possibly come up with was already taken somewhere. Like, we came up with the most ridiculous names and everything was already a band name. And so the one thing we finally settled on at the time was Buffalo, Buffalo, Buffalo. I forget who even brought it up. I think Galen said something about it because it's like that phrase or like that joke in English language that buffalo, the word buffalo 8 times is a grammatically correct sentence in the English language.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, okay, well, we're not going to name it 8 buffaloes, but maybe 3 buffaloes is like silly enough and people will kind of get the joke. And so we went in, we showed up, and we wrote down our name, Buffalo, Buffalo, Buffalo. And it's our turn to go up, and the host of the open mic looks down, he says, all right, next up, Buffalo, Buffalo, and Buffalo. So we go up, and I was like, all right, well, that didn't really work. But we ended up keeping that name for a while. I think for like 6 months or so, that was our name. And it was silly and charming, and it sort of disarmed our audience and like, let them know that like, we're not taking it too seriously. Like, it's for fun, and we're trying to have fun, and we want the audience to be having fun too. Mm-hmm. And so I think it accomplished its goal there. But then people were just calling it like Buffalo Cubed or Triple B. And I was like, I don't really like any of these nicknames, so I was like, maybe we should change it. And so we did the same thing. We're like, okay, let's do another one. We went to a bar, spent another 2 hours drinking beers, trying to come up with band names, and then we were just like throwing out words. And Zach said like, karate is a fun word, and I was like, karate is a fun word, and I really like baseball, so like, maybe karate baseball is a thing. And then we were like, baseball karate? No, karate baseball sounds right. And then we're like, all right, we'll just leave that and probably change it another 6 months or so. But no, so far it's been like a year and a half or so that we've had karate baseball, and I think it's maybe here to stay. One of my friends the other day described it. I was talking about how I think it's such a ridiculous name, and he said, "No, dude, I think it like perfectly describes your guys' music." And I don't really know what that means, but I guess I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to. Karate and baseball, those are two very cool sports. And I suppose if you had stuck with Buffalo, 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 and people just started calling you Buffalo, that kind of would have defeated the entire premise, right? Considering it's supposed to be a complete sentence.
Totally. So, yeah, I think I'm glad we got out of that one. But yeah, exactly what you said. I think karate's really cool and baseball's really cool. And, you know, we're not that cool, but maybe by association, because of those words, we become a little cooler.
So I was talking to one of my friends, Mateo, for this podcast, and described music as being kind of like a labor of the heart, and writing being like a labor of the brain. I feel like when I'm writing, I'm like constantly racking my brain for details, and I feel like I'm trying to channel something that's inside my head. Whereas when I feel like I'm, you know, playing music or writing music, I'm like trying to like really get into like my own emotions and trying to like dig out whatever detail I can to help, you know, transfer any of that energy into the song. Do you feel differently, similarly? Am I crazy? Just curious to hear what you think of that.
No, I don't think you're crazy. I think I relate to that a lot. I think, and sometimes it's like, you know, the writing part, the brain part gets in the way of the other part, because you're like, oh, well, you know, and I don't really know much music theory, but sometimes I'm like, well, I feel like this kind of chord should come after this, or like right now, like I just did a verse and then a chorus, like maybe now I need like a different part. But I feel like when I think about it too much, sometimes the, you know, actual piece of music or whatever I'm creating struggles, because it's not as genuine of an expression. So no, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're spot on there.
I'm glad to hear that. I think I needed the validation. So how has playing shows altered the experience of going to shows for you?
When we go up on stage, our biggest goal is to have as much fun, because I know that if we're having fun, the audience is going to have fun. And so far, that seems to be the case, because I have the best time when I'm up there, and it seems like people have a pretty good time at our shows. So, so far, that's been working for us. But I think that, yeah, it's like whatever you put into it is what the audience is going to get out of it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to talk about the fortune cookie that I had with lunch this week. I usually read them and throw them away like a normal person, but this week's cookie cut deep, and so I wanted to share its wisdom with you. It read, "You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. Choose wisely." I like the word choose here because it's a reminder that the choice is ours. Maybe that's cheesy, but I pinned it to my wall, so I'm really not sure what that says about me. Anyways, this next song is called Fuck You, Matthew.
While your backlights flash, now I'm dancing in the dark. Will top come close? Will you come and pull it off? I'll move at this pace. When you want it, I'm in love. I hate it so much. I hate it. You don't know the answers. I hold just what you're seeking. You give another chance at all. I know just what you want, and I don't care. Take it or leave it. Look at us going round, and I don't care. Just gonna drag me deeper. You've got me caught in the undertow.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of pivot to the main theme of the podcast here, and just wanted to kind of pitch you some questions to see what your thoughts were on some of these things. As a bit of context, my real goal of this podcast is to try and explore some ways in which we can live better lives, and that can be through expressing ourselves through music, that could be through finding different ways to think, but I really am trying to take this podcast as an opportunity to learn from other people and try to force me to have conversations with people that I think could benefit the way that I think, but then by having it in a podcast format, be able to benefit other people who happen to be listening to it. So with that being said, I'm curious to hear from you. Is there anything that's bothering you about the world that we live in today? And is there anything that you see as a potential solution to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's hard because there's a lot of things going on in the world today that are either frustrating or like scary, I was just having the conversations with my friends yesterday. We were out, and they had said something about like, oh, well, luckily there wasn't a mass shooting yesterday. And then we got into talking about like how scary it would be to be in school right now and like these days. And I just think like the violence in the world is so scary to me. But there's so many things. Like one of the other things which I think is a big issue is the polarity of everything. You know, like every political issue, there's polarity. Every like social or environmental issue, there's polarity, and there's people on both sides saying like, okay, well, this is right, and this is wrong. And it's like people are almost just competitive to be competitive, or just like argumentative because they want to be right, I guess. And I feel like it's just such a toxic thing for everybody because everyone always feels like they have somebody coming after them, and they're always having like an enemy or somebody they have to like compete against. I don't really know what the solution is other than like aliens coming and us having like a common enemy, but
Yeah.
Realistically, it just seems like it's so embedded in us of like how we identify. Like if we identify one way politically, then we sort of align ourselves with these beliefs that other people that align themselves the same way have, even if you don't really feel that way, or you don't give yourself time to really contemplate like what the right perspective is. So it's really tough because I wish I knew an answer and was able to like sort of work towards that, but at this point I really don't.
Right. Well, you brought up two really interesting topics, and the first being violence, which I totally agree with, because you see it everywhere, right? It's I shouldn't say it's funny, but it's definitely something that we are laughing at in a kind of like, I can't believe that this is real type of thing. But I was looking at some accounts to pick up to start working for my job the other day, and I came across a company that made bulletproof backpacks for kids. So it was like a backpack that had like 2 like Kevlar plates in it that are inside the backpack, but then it also has a chest plate that like wraps around the front of the kid. And on the website they just had all these kids that are like super stoked wearing these backpacks. I just couldn't help but think that it was like well, first of all, it was hilarious because how ridiculous they look. They look like Ninja Turtles. But the second part of it was like, I just couldn't believe that like we've gotten to a point where an entire company was built around building backpacks that were bulletproof so that kids could go to school and parents could feel somewhat relieved that they'd at least have parts of their body being bulletproof. I know that's like a completely ridiculous thing, but I feel like it reflects kind of the reality of the situation we're living in right now, where it's like anybody can have a weapon at any times. And I definitely understand like being fearful of violence because it seems like you just come out from anywhere. And I don't remember being like checked for guns every concert I went to when I was going to concerts in high school or even like 5 years ago. But it seems like it's just going to get more and more commonplace because it seems like violence has as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you said with the backpacks, like it's crazy that is the solution that we're moving towards. Like, okay, I guess we better just bulletproof everybody because that doesn't stop the fear at all. And I feel like obviously the shootings are the issue, but like the fear is a very close secondary issue because like these kids are gonna just be mentally stressed, exhausted, and like anxious all the time. And it's like we're starting these kids off who are supposed to, kids are supposed to be carefree, especially in high school. You're supposed to just be, figuring out life a little bit. And if you're just constantly worried about somebody busting in with a gun and you're like anxious about this stuff all the time, I feel like we're just not giving kids the fair opportunity to grow up. And I'm really nervous and like, I don't know, apprehensive, I guess, at the thought of like how these kids are going to grow up and what the future is going to look like with like all of this sort of anxiety around it. If it's going to cause like us to live in a more sheltered world, or like you're saying, like you already, when you go to concerts now, you're checked more than we used to be. And it's just, I wonder how that is going to continue to spread.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you also look at it in the terms of like, we should be really looking at it in the terms of like how it's affecting these kids, because I think so often the conversation is like about gun control, right? And that, I mean, it makes sense that it is in a lot of ways. That's like where the legislation comes from. And that's, obviously like these tragic events aren't happening with ninja stars. Like, guns are the tools of destruction in these cases, but it's like, even if you don't go to a school that has a shooting, it's the fact that it has to even be a concern, you know? Like, my biggest worry in school was that girls liked me and that I was cool. And unfortunately, neither of those things were true for me. But at least I wasn't worried about, guns every day. So, it's a crazy world that we live in, and hopefully we can get to figure out some way where, like, we can start providing solutions. To me, it does seem like the legislation seems to be the best bet, but the reality is, living in the United States means that you live in 50 different countries disguised as one. So it's just so hard to have these conversations in a way that it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like, with the way politics are going, those 50 individual states are going to continue to become more individualized.
Definitely. And you also touched on something that I thought was interesting, which was, kind of alluding to what we were just talking to in regards to polarity. And you said something that was really interesting about, having these ideologies, and that being right seems to be more important to being factual. To me, it seems like it's like we created these teams and everyone feels the need to be a part of one team or another team. And that means adopting every single idea or belief that team believes in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because like you're saying, if you just sort of adopt this team mentality of whatever my team believes and whatever, they say goes, then yeah, you're ceasing to think as an individual. And that's so dangerous because, who knows who's really, skewing these teams to believe what they believe. Obviously, we know there's a lot of like corporate control in politics, and especially our politicians. And so, these people have a lot of money and power, and it's pretty easy to believe that they could skew like an entire, to keep it in the same words, like the entire team's beliefs. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely a concern, is like our inability to think critically and freely and sort of just become like a monotonous society. I don't know. It's all scary.
Mm-hmm. And especially and I'm really trying not to pick on either one side or the other here, but it's just like when you're talking about polarity, you're talking about ideologies, it just seems to me like neither side and no team have a role model. And like that's left or right or middle or whatever. I just feel like it used to be that our politicians were like figures that you could at least respect in society. I think they're maybe an old-fashioned sense, they're people that we consider heroes to some degree. Whereas I think if you asked an average person or an average young person now who their heroes are, like you might have one or two people on the left that will say like AOC or Bernie Sanders, and you might have one or two people on the right that'll say Trump or someone relating to him. But it's really rare. Like I feel like we don't respect politicians as much as we used to, but I also feel like they kind of deserve it.
Yeah, I agree. But I have an interesting follow-up question to that is, what do you think, or like who do you think are the proper role models right now? And the reason I ask that is because I feel like our society is doing such an interesting job of like idealizing celebrities. And so like I feel like I've been thinking a lot about the concept of heroes or role models, and like I feel like a lot of the people that our society looks up to, just none of them are great role models.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely agree that like when we look at like the pedestal that we tend to put people on in terms of like society, the people near the top aren't necessarily people that I would pick. What I can say for myself is that a lot of the role models I found have been through reading, and a lot of them are not alive anymore. So and maybe that's kind of like a cop-out answer, but like one of my role models I would say is Marcus Aurelius. He wrote Meditations. I've talked about him in the podcast before, but he's like this really important figure in Stoicism. And like I read Meditations like every day. It's like next to my bed, and it just helps me to feel less anxious. And then I have other books that I read for other things, and so I feel like I can go to books. But when it comes to like people that are still alive, I definitely have a more difficult time picking. But I tend to lean towards people who are like seem to have humanitarian interests at the heart of what they do. So like, for instance, like I love Jack Johnson so much. Like I like his music a lot. He's a big influence on me, but I like that like not only is he like a musician and writes music that I like and would like kind of imitate at times when I'm doing my own thing, but he like has donated like huge amount of his profit to charities, like more than he's kept for himself. And there's also like a writer named Ram Dass who was this spiritual guru basically throughout the 1960s, but he's from the West, and he dedicated like so much of his money to charities that when he had a stroke when he got older, he didn't even have enough finances to take care of himself because he had given so much away. So I'm not saying that you should give all your stuff away, but I think, at least for me, when I think about role models, it tends to be people who seem to care about the planet and the people that inhabit it in a way that's beyond them and also like beyond their legacy. So like they want to leave a world a better place than they found it, and that seems to be at the heart of what they do.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
How about you? Who would you say are, your role models, and what's kind of the way that you go about determining that?
I think that, one of the people that I've been most looking up to recently that I think is doing an awesome job in society is David Attenborough, who does the Planet Earth documentaries and a lot of just Earth-based docs. And I think what's cool is, he makes these documentaries that are pretty widely watched, and people can just see that there's so much more to the Earth than what's in their backyard and like the cities that they travel to. And I think that's really important because I think another issue that I think about often is obviously the environment, because it's like the world that we live in. And I think we're making such selfish decisions right now of like, okay, well, it's cheap to use this kind of energy, and so let's do that, even though it might destroy the planet. I'm not going to be here in 100 years, so what's it matter? But like that's just such a toxic way of thinking about things. And I think people like David Attenborough that are like reminding us that the Earth is insane. Like there's so many crazy things on the Earth, and he like goes around and makes these documentaries about the plants and the animals and just everything that lives on the Earth besides us, and the impact that we have on them. And it's very visible. He had this one, I can't remember what it was called right now, but it basically was like it took place in the year that like when COVID first happened, like in 2020, and everyone was inside, and they basically showed how the Earth like healed itself when it didn't have people on like going around for a whole year. And it was unbelievable how many animals like readapted to doing things differently, and how like plants grew back where they hadn't been. And it's really eye-opening to see like all this stuff. And I think somebody that can like take all these messages and these ideas and like themes of showing people that the Earth is cool, and like making it into a documentary that's so widespread or like in any form of art, like being able to express that is really amazing. So I would definitely say he's got to be one of my role models.
Yeah, I like David Attenborough. The entire idea of like environmental stewardship, I think, is really important as we kind of look at where we're headed. And I definitely would, like, going back to what we said about politicians, like to see a little bit more of that in some of the people that get elected. But I think that's a great answer. And David Attenborough's great, and the Planet Earth documentaries I've seen an infinite number of times because they're that amazing. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this. So like when I think about this idea of like environmental stewardship, I think about like whose responsibility is it, and it's like I probably could eat less meat and maybe use less plastic, but it seems to me that like, well, obviously the government should be the one intervening, but I find it to be a little bit discouraging, or at least more than a little bit discouraging, that the richest people in the world seem to be more interested in getting off the planet than trying to save the one we have.
Yeah, for sure discouraging, because you think about how much money is being spent on that expedition to leave Earth, and think about the impact it could make if we spent it on fixing the Earth. There's a lot that could definitely be done. But it's an interesting point that you bring up, because I feel like we are so conditioned now to like think about, okay, well, I should recycle, which is good. Everyone should recycle, but realistically, us recycling has like so little impact compared to what these mega corporations are doing and like polluting water and stuff. And it's like almost as if, politicians or whoever passes the blame onto us, even though there's so little impact that we actually have or can have, even if like in a positive way. And so it's kind of like, yeah, like you're saying, discouraging, because I want to be able to do my part, but I know that even if I do my part to the best abilities, like it's still not going to have a ton of effect.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that you bring that up. It being really more of the government's job than the company's job, or really more importantly, rather than our job. And again, not that I don't think we have a role. I just think that ours is much less significant. But it was interesting when Amazon was having like their strikes of the past couple of years during the pandemic because they're being overworked. And I thought what was really interesting was like the government's response was essentially like, Amazon, you should pay your workers more. And then Amazon's response was like, no, that's like your job to make it legislation for us to pay our workers more. Like we're playing by the rules. If the people are not satisfied with the rules, then that really is the government's job to change them. But it seems like they're reluctant to do that. And so, that's a big part of why we're in the situation we're in.
For sure.
So last thing, Ben, if people are interested in following Karate Baseball or following you, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, if you want to check out the band, our YouTube's just Karate Baseball. We have 2 videos now. Hopefully we'll have a few more. I think, like I was saying, I'm trying to get a little bit better about like navigating the narrative space of telling stories musically and visually. And I think we have all the resources for it. So I think we have the capability of making some pretty cool stuff. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, our Instagram is Karate Baseball Band, and check us out on Spotify. And yeah, I'd love for you guys to listen.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Well, we really appreciate you stopping by and having this conversation. Karate Baseball, I'm telling you, for all you listeners out there, they are your new favorite band. Check them out. And in the meantime, I'll do it for you.
You and me on a deadline. Eyes that burn from the cigarette smoke in the background now. Your lies, they sound like static, and I feel used. But there's nothing new. You and me on a deadline. Eyes that burn like a sycamore grove in the summertime now.
If you liked what you just heard, be sure to check out Karate Baseball's new song, Deadline. It comes out this Thursday. It may even be out by the time you're listening to this. Next week, I will have Jessica Kale joining me. She is a historian who you may have seen featured on Netflix's docuseries Lost Pirate Kingdom, or you may know her from her popular podcast, Dirty Sexy History, where she discusses the history of sex and other aspects of history that aren't sanitized by a classroom. We get into a little bit of everything, so if you like sex or history, this is the episode for you. If you don't want to miss it, feel free to subscribe to this podcast and preferably rate it to stay in the loop. You can also follow me on any form of social media at Here's Johnny Nava. That's all I have for you today, so I hope the rest of your day is a beautiful one and that you make the most of it.